Good evening, everybody. Okay, this is our first meeting of the year, so I just wanted to wish you all a very happy new year. So, and hopefully everything will be going well this year for you. Now, I would like to welcome you all to Cambridge City Council's Planning and Transport Scrutiny Committee meeting. This includes members here, those attending virtually, and those members of the public who are watching the live stream via the Council's YouTube channel. My name is Councillor Antoinette Nestor, and I'm the chair of this committee meeting. Now, those please present in the room note that everything on your desk, including your laptop screen, could be broadcast at some point as cameras within the room follow the microphone being switched on. If you're following the Teams meeting here in the room or your laptop, your audio, microphone, and camera must be switched off. And if the fire alarm sounds, please follow the officers who will leave the room and exit the building via the Pierce Hill staircase and exit. Do not use the lift. I will now roll call councillors alphabetically by surname so the public can see who they are. I'm not aware of any apologies, but please let me know if this is incorrect. Are you present, Councillor Bagent?
I am.
Thank you. Councillor Beck?
Yes, me too.
Councillor Dikovic? I believe she's running late, correct? Okay. Councillor Porter?
Present, Chair.
Councillor Pounds? Councillor Swift?
Present, Chair.
Thank you. And Councillor Tong?
I'm here, hello.
Thank you. Now, the Executive Councillor for Planning, Building Control and Infrastructure, Councillor Thornborough, is also present. Welcome you.
Thank you, Chair.
Now, the senior officer present for this meeting is Stephen Kelly, Joint Director of Planning and Economic Development, and joining us virtually is the Deputy Director of GSCSP and 3C Building Control, Heather Jones. Is that correct? Yes. Thank you. Now, Committee Manager Claire Turncliffe and Meeting Producer Boris Herzog are also present. Thank you. Other officers will be joining us throughout the meeting. Now, just to explain you the meeting procedure, the committee will receive a presentation from the relevant report author. Members will then discuss the report and vote on the recommendations. As chair, if the vote is split, I will have the casting vote. And following the vote of the committee, the executive councillor will be asked if they agree the decision. Now, the first item on the agenda. Have any apologies been missed? No? Okay. Now, moving on to agenda number 2. Please could committee members declare if they have any declarations of interest and identify which agenda item their declaration relates to. Of course, you can declare an interest at any time during the meeting.
Chair, I'm a member of ChemCycle.
Thank you, Councillor Bagent. Noted. Anybody else? No? All right. Thank you. Now, agenda item 3, the minutes. The minutes of November 9th of November 2023 meeting have been submitted to this meeting for approval. If there are any concerns, please could members raise them now, otherwise they will be both approved as correct record. Yes, Councillor Bagent?
Chair, I understand Stephen Kelly was going to make a report back on the 2040 progress. And I think that's been missed from the minutes.
Councillor Kelly?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, at the previous meeting I did, and I think it's covered, Councillor Bagent, at the bottom of page, sorry, bear with me, I think it's the bottom of page, I think it's the bottom of page 7, or I think there's a reference to the need to report further on the plans for Cambridge and the wider area. So I'm just trying to, I had the reference just now, but I'm working from one screen, unfortunately. But certainly in respect of the Cambridge and the government's Cambridge 2040 programme. The reason there isn't a report to this meeting is that in many respects that programme is still forming. And although there has been quite significant engagement between officers and civil servants, and there have been some meetings with politicians, the project is very much in its formation stages, and the council, the City Council and South Cambridge Council, as well as the county and combined authority officers, have been asking for clarity on the formation of that project, its governance, the membership of the Cambridge Delivery Group, and its scope and purpose. The project has created several work streams. These are all being led by civil servants, reporting into the chair of the Cambridge Delivery Group, and in fact I think the main driver behind the activity at this moment in time, who is Peter Freeman, who Michael Gove, MP, announced as the person leading that project. So the reason there isn't a report back to you at this moment in time is we're waiting to provide that clarity with a more definitive programme and outlining to you what we can determine in terms of the scope and form. As I said, there are work streams looking at water, transport, master planning, economic needs of the area commissioned by Peter Freeman on behalf of the Secretary of State. And in some areas, particularly to do with water, officers from the Shared Planning Service particularly have been engaging with officers from DEFRA, the Environment Agency and others. But there isn't a very, if you forgive the pun, it's still fairly fluid in terms of the way in which those work streams will come together in terms of a set of definitive proposals. And indeed, there isn't yet a commitment to a particular timescale that I can advise the committee of. So it seemed premature for me to try and distill that into a report that essentially would say very little. And it's for that reason I didn't, I thought it not appropriate for me to bring a report this time. We will, of course, update the committee as matters hopefully firm up over the next quarter.
Thank you, Stephen. Yes, Councillor Bajan.
Thank you very much for that, Stephen. I think really that was all I was expecting. I just think that we need to be recognising that somewhere this process needs to be scrutinised, and I think this is probably the right committee for it to be scrutinised. And I'm wondering, Chair, if you could think about whether it ought to be a standing item on our agenda from now onwards, because there are obviously lots of meetings taking place. And although it may not be seen particularly relevant and there may not be very much information, there's going to be a real interest in this city, and we're here to scrutinise that process. Thank you.
Certainly, Councillor Bajan, I think it's a very good proposal, and as fair to actually make note of it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? Yes, Councillor Porter?
Just to say from this side, I would support Councillor Bajan in that. I think it would be useful to have regular updates. Thanks, Chair.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Now, agenda item 4, which is the public question section. Now, new public speaking rules, which were agreed at the October full council meeting, provide that members of the public must send in the text of their public questions in advance of the meeting. The text of the question will no longer be read out as it has been published in advance of the meeting. The executive councillor or officer has 2 minutes to provide a response, and Claire has a little bear here that actually she will ring with all technology, always works. So, and public speakers then have an opportunity to ask a follow-up question for up to 2 minutes. And the executive councillor or officer may respond as appropriate for up to 2 minutes. The committee manager will advise when the time periods are up. So this item will last no longer than 30 minutes. Welcome to the public speakers present. Thank you very much for being here. And I believe we have one speaker online as well, or one person online.
joined us.
All right, okay. Now,
Mr. Coffin is the chair.
yes, that's correct. So would the Executive Councillor please respond to question 1 for Mr. Carpen? Thank you very much, Mr. Carpen.
Yes, thank you, Anthony, for joining us and bringing your question. And I know you've raised this previously several times, I think. And I have a lot of information from the officers to cover this, but it may be that if I don't go through it all, I might write to you with this information. So I think you know that there is the new Perth Sports and Swimming Complex, which has begun, and there will be some public use of that. It's mainly a private facility, but there's a timetable in which I think the regular public use has been shown, and that would be advertised. We are collecting information as part of the local plan, and we have commissioned a playing pitch strategy along with an indoor sports facility strategy. So that covers sports hall, indoor sports and swimming pools. And we've also commissioned a outdoor courts and rinks strategy, which will feed into the local plan. Yes, we have an indoor sports facility. We have to update that, and we have been in discussions with the University of Cambridge about their proposed swimming pool. But we also have an objective within the existing indoor sports facility because of the new growth in South Cambs to deliver a new pool. So there is a new pool being planned for Northstowe, but it is early days yet, but contributions through S106 have been sought. So I've been told about that when I went to visit the school, and it seems like a very exciting prospect, particularly for the school and the rural communities who might go to that. Now the swimming pool, the West Cambridge pool, it was part of an application from quite a long time ago, and we are in our discussions with the university is partly about warning them that there is a 7-year time limit on that, and the implications of that we need to go through with them. You also asked about Cambridge 2040. Yes, so Cambridge 2040 is there's a lot of focus on that, has been on the water scarcity and sustainable transport infrastructure. We are also moving ahead with the local plan, but that's been the water issue affects the local plan as well as the transport. So we're going to be bringing an update on the local plan to this committee in March. But again, if 2040 was to go ahead, absolutely, the sports and facilities evidence that we're gathering will be very important for whatever comes out of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Thornborough. Now, Mr. Carpen, do you have any supplementary questions? And if so, you have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Nestor. Thank you, Councillor Thornborough, for your response. I've been following the Secretary of State's comments about Cambridge 2040. I look forward to him providing a substantial chunk of funding for Florence Ada Keynes's brand new concert hall on Harvey Road by Parker's Piece, for an expanded new Museum of Cambridge at the top of Castle Hill, and a revamped Guildhall somewhere along the lines of Belcher's original proposal and the one in Graz in Austria. I'm astonished, quite frankly, that the University of Cambridge is still dragging its feet on the long-promised swimming pool, and I encourage students from the University of Cambridge to really kick up a storm on this, because this is something that was promised not only to the city but to them and their student societies And the last we've had from their consultants was that it's not much of a priority. And at public meetings, the Pro-Vice-Chancellor, Andy Neely, has basically, not shown that much interest in it. I encourage students to basically make it an election issue, given the general election coming up. I also want to refer to the former mayor of Cambridge, the first woman mayor of Cambridge, Eva Hartree, whose centenary we celebrate this coming year. And she basically warned developers about the challenges faced with the expansion of Cambridge. And she said that where she grew up in Stockport, like all Lancashire towns, quote, suffered very badly during the Industrial Revolution of the last century, and it grew up haphazard, and the attendant streets of cottages were built without any thought for the future or of the amenities or even reasonable conditions for life of those inhabitants, and thought that that should serve as a great warning to those who were responsible for future generations for the development of Cambridge not to allow such a thing to happen here. Therefore, I encourage in particular the students of Girton to make that point of one of their former students to the Vice-Chancellor and the Vice-Chancellor's advisors. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carpet. Councillor Thornborough, would you like to reply or comment too?
Thank you, Anthony. I think that was a statement rather than a question, and that certainly the voice of students are very important in this city, and I hope they hear your message. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, would the Executive Councillor please respond to question 2 for Mr. Claude, please? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clough, for bringing this question to us. First of all, you're correct that there was a public interest test. So the first report from the planning officers came to the planning committee at the end of quite a long day, and that was we turned off the public connection so that we could discuss it. I think it was really important that the committee had that opportunity, because the committee made the original decision, and there's a lot of feeling went into that, and it was a very long, hard committee, and we had to deal with a lot of information, and a lot of people came to that committee, and we discussed the whole of the planning committee, as well as what happened leading up to the planning committee and subsequently. And it was the case officer gave us some feedback as a result of the appeal, and there was a really good discussion. And so it was important that the committee members could actually feedback and talk about it after the appeal decision. I think that was very important for us as the committee members. But I think it was right that the public were not involved in that. There is now a judicial review process going forward on this matter, and we will not be able to really discuss this in great detail until we know the outcome of that judicial review. But I have said in public that the discussions with local organisations and residents about planning matters are really important, and it is the intention to have some more discussions with residents and local organisations going forward in a few months' time, as soon as I can arrange that, in line with whatever happens with a judicial review.
Thank you very much, Councillor Thornborough. Now, Mr. Claude, would you have a supplementary question? And if so, you have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thornborough. Yes, I have a supplementary question, which I'll read out now. In relation to the Alstone Croft application, residents were particularly concerned how the planning performance agreement process was used by Queen's College to enable numerous pre-application meetings with council officers, which were not all minuted, along with very extensive use of conditions, which meant that residents and members were not able to scrutinise appropriately the actual fine detail of the proposal prior to it coming to the planning committee. Could we have confirmation today that all these issues will be included in the open and independent inquest into the application?
So, I can't comment on that application and what will come out of the judicial review and our findings, but we have been, as a service, even before some time ago, we identified that the pre-application process should be reviewed, and it has been reviewed, and there will be more information coming out about councillor involvement in that process much earlier. But your specific question in relation to that application, I'm afraid I can't be clear on that now, but hopefully we'll be able to discuss that more going forward. But I can be in touch with you when our pre-application review process is in the public and let you know about that.
Councillor Thornborough, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Thornborough and Mr. Clough. Now, I'll move to question number 3 from Ms. Wales. Would the Executive Councillor please respond to it? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Sue, for bringing this question. It is very important, and I can assure you all the committee members feel the same. And we often raise the matter about overheating in planning committees, and we discuss it, and we really hope that it will be taken very, very seriously because it's such a big problem. So the building controls in June, I think 2021, there was a new Part O regarding overheating, which became mandatory in 2022, and that covers a lot more about the requirements to prevent overheating with the treatment of the facade and screening and shutters and roof overhangs, etc. But it also talks about natural ventilation, and there's a ventilation hierarchy that we hope developers will look at. So we talk about this in planning, but most of it they will have to be signed off at building regulations. But we do have a Greater Cambridge Sustainable Design and Construction SPD, which is a really good document. It also talks about overheating and again highlights the pyramid of so that passive ventilation can be used. And in our emerging local plan, we will be incorporating a climate change adaptation policy. So because it is so important that we will want to make sure our new policies are as up to date to deal with the climate crisis as possible. I can't really talk about the old homes in the city, because the planning we don't have that much control about dealing with overheating on existing buildings, and I would just encourage more trees being planted in the right place, the right trees in the right place to help with that. But we recently had a planning forum for residents associations, and we had a request to talk about the urban heat map and the effects of the buildings and hard surfaces on the temperature in our built-up environment. And that it was a really great session, and we do have a recording of that, I believe, and we could pass that to you. And I just want to say that if residents have if they have an issue they want planners to consider, then please let us know, and we may be able to include something in the next Residents Association forum that we hold. So, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Thornborough. Now, I've been informed that Ms. Wells is not present virtually, so there's no supplementary question. I will now turn to agenda item 5 on page 9, and it's the proposal to designate House Place conservation area. Now, I believe that the Principal Conservation Officer Development, Susan Smith, will introduce the report, and Susan is online. So, Susan, thank you very much for joining us, and please start. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. House Place, which is off of Huntingdon Road, was identified as an area to be considered for designation as a conservation area following the 2008-2009 Suburbs and Approaches study for Huntingdon Road. That proposal went to public consultation in 2009 and again in 2010. Report to Environment Scrutiny Committee in 2011 on the proposal was withdrawn. It did not go back to committee. Recently, the local ward councillors and the residents of Howes Place requested that the proposed designation be reviewed. The 2010 documents were reviewed and a draft appraisal and townscape map were consulted on for 4 weeks. All the responses received have been in favour of the proposal. So the recommendation is that the Executive Councillor approve the designation of a conservation area at Howes Place, the boundary of which is shown on the townscape map in the appendix to my report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. Yeah, you're okay? Sorry.
Sorry, no, I was just going to say, are there any questions?
Oh, yes. Yes. So now we'll move on to the member questions. So could I ask that you raise your hand and then press your microphone when you're asked to speak? So are there any questions? Yes, Councillor Porter, anybody else? So Councillor Porter, Councillor Dikovic, Councillor Tong. Thank you. So Councillor Porter.
Thank you very much, Susan. Thank you, Chair. I think, obviously, this is very welcome. I feel like I know this area extremely well, as it's come through planning and JDCC many times. I welcome particularly the additional protection that the conservation area will give to the trees. The pleach lines are so special, particularly when you read about the history. And actually, we've had that come through planning committee quite recently. I know that Councillor Payne, as ward councillor, is very supportive of this as well. I was really interested to note there's actually a disabled adapted house there built in 1921. It's like the precursor to the M43. I mean, that must probably be one of the earliest examples, I imagine, of an accessible house being built to address the need for former officers. I just want to ask, I noticed that it talks on page 31, section 11, about the need to look at TPO, so tree protection orders, for the trees at the rear of the property. And is this something the local planning authority would take forward? Is that more for residents? Because I just think, obviously, those trees, particularly at the front, the pleach lines, but just in general for the biodiversity with the large developments coming forward at Darwin Green there, that would be really useful to know how they could have some additional protection too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Porter. Now, Susan, would you like to respond to that comment, or you want me to get the other two questions?
No, I'm happy to respond. Any trees within the boundary of the conservation area have additional protection, and any works to those trees would require the prior authorisation from the tree officers. So it will give extra protection to trees without having to put a TPO on them.
Thank you very much, Susan. Councillor Dikovic, yes?
I think it's important to note that there's unanimous support for this proposal to designate the area as a conservation area. And it's good because it's going to provide an opportunity for the area to be preserved and enhanced for future generations. My question is just about the periodical reviews of conservation areas, and it says that they are periodically reviewed because it's a duty, it's the council's duty, but how periodically, what is the period that they are done, that they are reviewed? Sorry.
Thank you. Susan?
They should be reviewed every 5 years or so. At the moment, I think we're reviewing the latest one I'm going to be looking at was in 2011, so it's more than 10 years ago. But it's work that is done alongside our other work. So sometimes these things are not prioritised. If there is a suggestion that a boundary needs changing because of development alongside the conservation areas. Sometimes we can prioritise that work, but I'm afraid that there's no absolute period of deciding when to review them. We're doing them in a rolling manner, so as each one comes up, we then go to it.
Thank you very much, Susan. And Stephen also wants to comment in relation to that question.
Yes, thank you, Chair. We are in the midst of a 5-year programme at this moment in time of reviewing conservation areas. I think the commitment is around 5 per year. There is a schedule which was agreed, I think it was probably I'm trying to think whether it was in 2020 or 2021, but we have a programme which balances, because not only do we have the conservation areas in the city, we've also got the conservation areas in South Cambridgeshire, and I think there's a balanced approach to reviewing them. What I can do, Councillor, is ensure that you can see that schedule in terms of what's being reviewed, and then contextualised anything that you feel that might be a priority. We did, I think previously, the Executive Council might be able to confirm, put this to this meeting, I think, in terms of the schedule of reviews, but I can't point to when, and I certainly know that we did in South Cambridgeshire because we had a particular request for a review, which we then used as a baseline to it. But I can certainly ensure that we circulate the programme at this moment in time, and you can see if you wish to raise anything on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Now, Councillor Tong.
Well, Councillor Poor has actually beaten me to my question. It was also going to be about tree protection. So I guess I'll just quickly say that it's a great designation, and I think House Place is a really nice example of an area where social history and natural history basically intersect. So really good choice of location there.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tong. Now, are there any other questions before we go to vote? No? Okay. Well, we will now go to vote then, and the recommendation is on page 10 of the agenda pack. So, all those in favour, please raise your hand.
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much. Now, does the Executive Councillor agree with the recommendation?
Yes, I do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Thornborough, and thank you very much, Susan, for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, we now turn to agenda item 6, which is on page 41. Now, Cambridge City Council and South Cambridgeshire District Council is the Authority Monitoring Report for Greater Cambridge 2022-2023. And I would like to welcome the Planning Policy Manager, Jonathan Dixon, and Senior Policy Planner, Mark Dees, who are here in the chamber. The Principal Planning Policy Officer, Jenny Nutticombe, has joined us virtually. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, before I ask the officers to begin their report, I would like to remind the committee that an amendment to paragraph 3.11, which is at the bottom of page 60 and then 61 of the Planning and Transport Agenda Pack, was published to show a change of dates. A hard copy has been placed in front of you. Now, everybody has that? I believe so. Thank you very much. So, Mark, would you please introduce the report? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sure members are fairly familiar with the AMR process. Many of you have seen many previous iterations of it. We do have a statutory requirement to publish an authority monitoring report every year. And all I want to do by way of introduction is just to remind you as to what its purpose is and to just highlight a very few of the key findings before we open up to any questions you may have. So essentially the AMR has got two objectives. Firstly, it is describing our progress in developing our planning policies against as set out in the local development scheme. And then secondly, it is actually monitoring the impact of our currently adopted planning policies in our current local plans. So in terms of the first part, where are we in terms of progressing our plans? I think probably the most significant step in the development of the emerging local plan during the last monitoring year was the update to the development strategy, which was agreed earlier on in 2023, and there were three key parts to that. The first was that we did recognise that we were planning for an updated level of employment and housing for the area. Secondly, we agreed three key sites that would be part of our strategy, which were North East Cambridge, Cambridge East and the Cambridge Biomedical Campus. And then thirdly, we agreed that the principles as set out in the first proposals draft document would form the basis for allocating further sites as we go forward in developing the development strategy further. In terms of the progress, as you'll be aware, it has been slower than hoped because of principally the delays in the DCO process for the wastewater treatment works and just water issues more generally that meant that we've not been able to progress the local plan in line with the original timetable, and we do plan to set out a revised timetable in the new local development scheme this year when things become clearer. The other final point I will make on the developing plan side is that there were actually 3 neighbourhood plans made during the monitoring year, although they were all in South Cambridgeshire. In terms of monitoring the impact of our planning policies, I think first thing to say, it was a good year, I think. Certainly in terms of housing delivery, it was very strong. We delivered over 2,300 houses across the whole area. That's well above the annual required delivery rate, to such an extent that actually now we are above the annual required rate for the whole of the plan period. Only just, but we are going right back from 2011 to 2023. We are slightly ahead of schedule. Related to that, Chair's already mentioned an addendum to the report. The government published the housing delivery test results about a week before Christmas, so after we drafted this report. But it is just worth pointing out that, again, we performed relatively well on that. Cambridge achieved a score of 98% against its required rate over a rolling 3-year average, and South Cambs was at 145%. So there are no implications for either authority on that point. I would just add, and Stephen Kelly's made the point before, it is a frustration that we are reporting separate figures for the 2 authorities, because we have a joint 5-year housing land supply which was agreed for the 2 areas, and it would seem sensible that we have a joint housing delivery test result for the 2 areas, and if we did that, we would be comfortably above 100% for the whole area. But as I say, fortunately at the moment we are in a strong position in both authorities. The final point to say on the housing is that we not only did we do quite well in terms of housing numbers, but we did well in affordable housing. So we delivered nearly 800 affordable homes across the Greater Cambridge area, and we certainly met all of our affordable housing policy requirements on all schemes. So as you'll be aware, in Cambridge, schemes of 10 to 14 units require 25% affordable housing. Schemes of 15 units or more require 40%. There were only 5 schemes that met the threshold, but they all achieved their targets. And in fact, some of them, because they were Cambridge Investment Partnership schemes, actually delivered 100% affordable housing. So that was very positive. In terms of the employment, it was a bit less positive. Relatively small net changes, but there was a very small net decline in employment floor space in the city, which was counterbalanced by a very small increase in South Cambs, and a similar picture emerged with regard to retail, and I'll come back to that at the end. With regard to the more environmental focused policies, again, very positive news. Our policies continue to have a positive impact on climate change and mitigation measures, so we are getting water efficiency and carbon reduction conditions into a much higher level of planning permissions now than previously. In fact, I think in Cambridge it was pretty much 100%. Measured pollutants, so well below national air quality objective levels on all measures. We're continuing to make sure that we look after our priority habitats, so in terms of things like county wildlife sites, city wildlife sites, very few planning permissions within them, and where they were all assessed as having no negative impact on the areas. There were no significant changes to the number of listed buildings or the number of buildings on the buildings at risk register, and the quality of life indicator generally continue to be favourable. You will see in the report that it is supported by 2 quite large appendices. The first one is a list of every indicator in both local plans, the 4 area action plans, and all the sustainability appraisals to support those. So there's a huge number of indicators. And on the key ones in the local plans, we use the red, amber, green system to assess them, to just monitor whether there are any problems. At the moment, we have got only one red flag on any indicator, which is a retail one, because when we wrote the local plan, we had plans to increase the amount of retail floor space in Cambridge, and clearly shopping trends are such that that's realistically not going to happen now due to the increase in online shopping. There are also about half a dozen amber flags. Most of those relate to particular site allocations, which are just being slow coming forward, and we are reassessing those as part of the local plan process. There is also, I think, an amber flag on the employment figures, because we have got a target in the Cambridge local plan to increase the amount of employment land by 12 hectares. In actual fact, we've reduced the amount of employment land by about 13 hectares. But at the same time, we have delivered a net increase of 150,000 square metres of employment floor space. So you can kind of read that either way. And then the second appendix is simply a huge amount of data, which I think is contextual for a number of the indicators. So, for example, there's a lot of housing data there. We'll show you housing mixes and where we're delivering the housing and so on. And then the final point I would make is just to remind you about the recommendations. So simply 2 recommendations. Firstly, just agreement to publish the AMR on our website, and secondly, to delegate any minor editing that is required to Stephen Kelly. And on that point, just to say that obviously the AMR is being twin tracked through both yourselves and the South Cambridgeshire committee process, and it won't be going to South Cam's cabinet until the 6th of February, so we won't be able to publish anything until after then. But that's it.
Thank you very much, Mark. Now, we'll move on to the members' questions. So could I ask you to raise your hand as well, and then press your microphone? So Councillor Pounds, I know you raised your hand first. So Councillor Pounds, Councillor Porter. Okay, so Councillor Pounds, Councillor Beck, Councillor Porter. Anybody else, just to give that order? No? All right. So we'll go in that order then. So Councillor Pounds.
Thank you, Chair. So I noted that you mentioned that 794 affordable dwellings completed in 22 to 23, which is above the plan average. So I was actually going to ask if we'd met our affordable housing targets, but I think you've made it quite clear that we have, for which I'd just like to say that that's really welcome news. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Pounds. Now, Councillor Beck.
Thank you. Question about the 5-year housing trajectory. And I'm referring to page 59 in the report. What I can see from the report is that we're ahead of the game on a combined basis, which is really excellent news. Yes, it's great to see that we can do that. The report also says that, implies that we have a shared housing trajectory with South Cambridgeshire, which is totally understandable because we coordinated our plans together. And it also says that the expectation has always been that the preponderance of the numbers would be with Cambridge in the early years and with South Cambridgeshire in the latter years. And it looks from the numbers that we're sort of at the crossover point, or we've just crossed over. So what my question is, are there circumstances where we could be penalised through the trajectory falling short in the remaining years, given that, 2 things really, given that the preponderance of the numbers from here are going to be controlled by decisions of another council, and secondly, things like the water issue, which also will affect development, which, as far as our numbers are concerned, will relate preponderantly to South Cambridgeshire. So just a question about what are the circumstances where we could be penalised for something that we really can't do anything about?
Well, with regard to the joint trajectory, that was agreed by, I think, both inspectors on their local plan, so there is no issue with doing it on a joint basis. And I think our trajectory is fairly positive at the moment, so I don't envisage a situation where you would be penalised. I guess South Cambs were in the same situation in the early years when they were dependent on delivery in Cambridge, and we're moving into more delivery in South Cambs as we start to see, in particular, the new settlements coming on stream. And we'd expect to see further growth there. In terms of the water, I'm going to pass to my colleague John, who I think probably give you a better answer on where we are with water discussions and the implications of.
So I would say that from the outset, when we would do our returns for this test, we do highlight that the logic when two local plans have been adopted that say there is a joint approach to the sub-region and its housing should be that it is reported together. And unfortunately, that hasn't been taken up. We've reported it, I think, every year we write it on our response to the logic. In terms of consequences, the approach to the test is set out in the National Planning Policy Framework, and it relates to the percentage or how far below the 100% percentage you achieve. And looking forward, we have done some testing of this, looking forward to this, by and large, based on the published trajectory, you know we update it every year, but on the published one, even if you consider them separately, we are largely in a position where we may only dip largely into the territory of being required to produce an action plan. And my logic, obviously we'd have to prepare that, but my logic, part of our action is we've taken action, we've developed a plan strategy jointly with our joining authority with a thorough approach to a strategy which is delivering. But clearly we would have to deal with that as required. I think we continue to stress to DLUC the need to look at this and keep it under review. But at the moment, the consequences, because we are still in a good place amongst both authorities, look fairly limited, but we will need to keep it under review and continue to stress it and that it should be addressed. The other way, obviously, is that we need to be continuing with our plan review, and the aim of that would be to have a single joint plan. But I think we've addressed some of the reasons why that's, being caught up in the water issue and so on. And we'll be bringing a timetable not before March, is what the forward plan says. We will come with an update. But Stephen's alluded to a number of the issues already in his responses.
Thank you very much, John. And then Councillor Porter, you have a question?
Thank you very much. Thank you for the report. Magnificent bit of work. Huge amount of data in there. I mean, yeah, impressive. So thank you to officers. So I had a few comments. I'm pleased to see that, well, I'm not pleased. I note that we've included the BDW housing issue where we're having some removed and rebuilt. But, it's good that that is covered in there so we don't obviously have our numbers not working because some that have built have no longer been built and will have to be rebuilt. I wondered if officers, on the at-risk, we have two buildings that are still at risk, so the Cheddars Lane Pumping Station and Leicester St Andrew, I think it is. Just interested, they're still on the monitoring report. Is there any active work going on with those? And I suppose if it's helpful, I'll just run through my points together if that's quicker rather than... So, obviously the kind of big missing thing for me is the Cambridge Barnard Campus Master Plan. I know that it's not part of our monitoring, but I notice on other sites we have master plans being monitored. And I think that's come through Joint Development Committee several times, that is an area we are perhaps lacking. We're having very piecemeal development there. And yes, so obviously I would hope that in future our monitoring could include that if it comes forward. The other point I wanted to make, it relates again, it's Appendix 1.8 on page 99. So we're talking about the loss of retail and, as you say quite rightly, a lot of online shopping. In effect, it's a bit out of date, some of our targets, because we know the market's changed substantially. But we've also got the development of lab space. some of which we can record because obviously it might require planning consent. But again, I know I've said this before, but the Class C, so where things that used to require consent, like going from housing to labs to shop, don't. So again, I just urge, well, I'd be interested in officers' opinion on how we can capture that data better. Because, you know, lab space per se isn't a bad thing. It brings footfall, it brings jobs. But at the moment, I just sort of think we're saying retail's down, but it's really hard for us to track because of the permitted development and the Class E, what's changing. And I know I've raised this before, but I just think it's such an important point because we can't monitor what's going on in our city if we can't report on these changes. So those are my points. Thank you.
Can I take the last one first? I think in terms of the monitoring, you're right in that there are problems in that as things don't require planning permission, it's difficult to monitor when your system of monitoring is based on monitoring planning permissions. But there are a couple of things. Firstly, we are on sites now, we are monitoring on both the old use class order and the new use class order. So we've got a consistent data set going all the way back to 2011. So we are still recording where we can. And even where something wouldn't require a planning permission just for a change of use, if there's some sort of building work involved, the shop frontage change or whatever, we will still capture those. The other point on the retail is we also, in addition to monitoring the broad trends, we do monitor a number of the district centres in Cambridge. So we have policies around certain percentages of the units remaining in retail use. And we simply do that by we go out and look and we just record it. So we will still be able to do some bits. And it might be that increasingly we would have to do just physically going and looking at things rather than relying on planning permissions. In terms of the building at risk register, we should ask me that 20 minutes early because Susan Smith, who just presented the last item, wrote that section of the report and she's gone. So I can ask her for you and I can come back, but I don't know off the top of my head what we do on that. And on the Cambridge West master plan, can I ask Stephen if you'd like to comment? But I think you commented on this in a previous meeting.
In terms of the biomedical campus master
Sorry, the
plan.
biomedical,
yeah. I mean, we have raised with the kind of oversailing operators of the biomedical campus. They formed a company called CBC Limited, and we have been engaging with them as part of the local plan process on exactly the point that you've highlighted, seeking to engage them in a discussion around a set of development principles that's not, as you say, the master plan referenced in the original adopted plan policy is now out of date in many respects, and new infrastructure like the railway station and so forth is coming forth that was unanticipated. We're hoping to persuade them of the merits of taking that approach. It's very difficult to obviously impose upon that because we need a collaboration around the future pattern of development that they're envisaging within the existing campus. And that process is, of course, separate to the joint local plan process about potential further expansion. So we will aim to, we're very conscious of the Joint Development Control Committee's ambitions in that space, and we are seeking to persuade the CBC Limited and the representatives on the campus to work with us around something that will help members of the committee have a degree of confidence that there's a coherent set of principles, particularly design principles, for that site in the shorter term.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Now, does it relate to the same question? No? Okay, I'll go one more round and then I'll go back to you, Councillor Beck. Now, Councillor Dikovic.
So I'm just looking at the efforts made in relation to gypsy and traveller sites. So there's a new GTANA that's being prepared as part of the evidence base for the new Greater Cambridge local plan. And my question is, how does the local council plan to utilise this and its ambitions in order to deal with the demand in the city? Because as a city councillor for Arbury, that's quite a popular topic, and we generally get members of those communities and encampments in Arbury. So, yeah, what does the local council plan to do with that? Thank you.
So in terms of plan making, there are requirements set out in national planning guidance, in this case the Planning Policy for Travellers, a separate document from the National Planning Policy Framework, which sets out that rather like planning for housing, we need to identify the need and then in our plans identify how we're going to plan for that need. We are currently awaiting the completion of that needs assessment. There were some delays earlier in the process, but it is now well underway, and we hope to get the results relatively early this year, I believe. It's also having to be adapted. There were some changes announced only just before Christmas regarding the definition used in planning in terms of planning for travellers, which needs to then be reflected in that work as well, so we need to catch up with that. So, in short, in the plan-making process, we will need to identify how that needs to be met, which could be allocations. So we need to look for where suitable sites that could be. So that could be new land allocations. It could be requirements from elements of major developments, for example, is another option. And we're working really closely with departments from both councils, including the housing departments, as we start to work through that process. And we will need to bring back the results of that planning through these meetings as we progress the local plan, hopefully this year as we start to resolve some of those issues again that we referred to earlier.
Thank you very much. Yes, Councillor Swift.
Thank you, Chair. It's related to Councillor Dibkovic's question, and it's page 66, Gypsy and Traveller sites. It's just really, there's no indication of any data, and I'd just like to ask when the data, is there could we have a date for when the data will be actually published in the report? Thank you.
So when you say data, are you referring to data on the need for gypsy and traveller accommodation?
Well, just it's there's no actual quantitative information as far as I can see, and I'd just like you to clarify.
I think there is some information in the appendices and in the report just on, we monitor the number of permissions for sites, and we also published some key data from something called the Traveller Caravan Count, which is a Office of National Statistics data set, so that those data for both South Cambs and Cambridge are in the appendix. John alluded to the big gap in our information base at the moment is what is the need for gypsy and traveller accommodation, and so it's been quite a long process to get this report done, but we believe we are getting quite close to getting a draft report to look at.
Thanks very much.
Now, are there any other questions from our councillors who have not had a chance to ask a question yet before I go to Councillor Beck? No? Okay, Councillor Beck.
Thanks, Chair. I've got several other questions, so I shall unload them all at once because otherwise it'll be too time-consuming. Affordable housing, and like Councillor Pounds, very pleased to sort of see the position that we've achieved there. But I had a question about detail. And it says on page 63, 62 and 63 that for smaller developments, South Cambs policy is different from the City Council's policy, and specifically for developments of 11 to 14 units, where we are expecting 25% affordable housing and they are expecting 40%. Now, I can't quite remember, I may be wrong about this, but it's possible that our policy was set because we were concerned about removing the viability of smaller developments at the time. But it would be interesting to know what the performance was of that little bit of policy in South Cambridgeshire and whether they are actually experiencing issues of viability or any other failures to develop where development perhaps should occur because they are expecting the higher affordable housing component. Because clearly my question is, like, if there aren't any obstacles that South Cambs are experiencing, then probably we would want to ask for the higher amount ourselves when we next make the policy. Oh, I'll carry on with the other questions. So the next one was about student accommodation, pages 64, 65. The monitoring report sort of says there hasn't been a lot happening broadly on that front. But I just wanted to share my view that I think that's only a partial picture, because there is a lot of buying and repurposing of buildings going on in the city, and as city centre councillor, I'm very aware of that. I'm also aware that that many people believe that the way higher education is the management of its finance at the moment puts the whole sector under an incentive to expand, because the fee levels have been frozen. So expansion is the only way to recover costs and share them amongst more students. Now, that may be as well as other good reasons to expand, but there does seem to be an important factor there. And I've experienced in my ward, and I'll name it, Little St Mary's Lane, where it's been, I think, originally a little enclave of non-student residents. It's been, I think, more recently quite mixed, but it looks like it's going to be kind of completely changed in character to student accommodation, small unit by small unit, so it flies under the radar of the HMO trigger, and means that we get little say and little awareness, indeed, about that sort of change. And I wonder whether we think our policy is really strong enough to deal with this, given this, I think, quite strong financial incentive for the universities to seek more students, seek more student accommodation in order to compensate for the fee levels being frozen. The next question was about, was on page 90, about the spaces and movement strategy. This was always kind of quite a curious street creature, an SPD from a planning authority which was trying to deal not with building development but with highways and what happens on them. I mean, I think we were all, everyone in the council was pretty supportive of what we were trying to do there, but I wonder what the future of that SPD and that strategy really is now, because it looks like it's sort of hanging in mid-air at the moment. And the final question relates to pages 96 and 97 on recreation and open space and playing pitch strategies. Elsewhere in the report, it records that we're developing an area action plan for North East Cambridge. And I'm interested to know whether the embryonic plan for the North East Cambridge area actually embodies the targets for provision of recreation, open space and playing pitches that are in our existing policies. I mean, I hear that we may review those policies and strategies, but I think we need to be sure that we aren't fitting strategies to, you know, especially as the City Council is part of the development initiative there in North East Cambridge. We need to be sure that we aren't sort of retrofitting policies to fit what we want as a developer in North East Cambridge. So that was also inviting a comment, please.
Okay, thank you. In the order that they came, the affordable housing threshold is interesting. When we went to kind of inform a cabinet meeting, South Council were a bit frustrated that they hadn't achieved the level of affordable housing that you've achieved, actually, because there were 5 schemes which meet the affordable housing requirement threshold, which haven't delivered all of the affordable housing. There were actually quite logical reasons for some of them. Simply, I think there's a couple of sites on Darwin Green where it'll be other parts of the scheme which will deliver the affordable housing, so they weren't required to. But there were a couple on viability where it's just being agreed that they're not going to deliver the levels. I think one was reduced to about 30%, one I think possibly virtually no affordable housing. But generally speaking, I don't think it is an issue. It tends to be very specific circumstances. But there were some sites, and they weren't sites in the 10 to 14 category. They were big sites where they were just delivering lower levels. So I don't think there is necessarily a viability issue there for you. In terms of student accommodation, I hear what you say, but what I'd say is I think our policies are really set up to monitor student accommodation in the traditional sense of university-provided accommodation, and that's what we're counting. And when I say there wasn't a lot of happening this year, it's because there wasn't a lot of university provision. So I don't dispute the fact there might well be lots of private rented accommodation which is switching to student needs. We're just not picking that up through our monitoring. So maybe we do need to look at that as we go forward in the emerging local plan and how we shape policies which will address that and not just the traditional halls of residence type accommodation. John, did you want to say something about the space?
Yeah, I think on the student question as well, obviously the policy monitoring there is monitoring the policy as set out in the Cambridge local plan, which was about delivery of specifically built student accommodation. So it's monitoring that particular use against the numbers set out in the plan. But yes, I think Mark makes a good point. The spaces movement, there isn't an imminent plan to move forward with the document. I think we are currently assessing what might be needed. That's in light of obviously the GCP projects and what's going on there, but also the new tools that have become available probably since that was considered, which is the design guide codes process as well. So we need to look into what might be appropriate as part of the design code as well. So I think that's a bit of a watch this space. I think we need to think about how that works, and also something we're thinking about as part of the new local plan, which we touched on in the first proposals, is how we use those areas of change policies and so on, which also pick up public realm. So there's some moving pieces here we need to fit together to get the best framework for that sort of guiding public realm where you get change from applications. So I think it's an area we need to keep moving forward on. The question about the recreation open space, I think that's picking up on a debate that was had when we were looking at that area action plan a year, 18 months ago. And I was trying to recall, we certainly had discussions about how the proposed submission, AAP, addressed many of those standards, but took an approach where it was looking at an urban approach to those standards and how it addressed those directly in policies in that. We are still developing evidence and policies to inform the new local plan in terms of its GI strategy, which was very strong in the first proposals, but also how we look at open space to reflect perhaps the differences between urban and rural areas, how we make the most of spaces that are available. So that's another work in progress area as well, I'm afraid. But certainly something really strong on our radar of what the new local plan needs to look into.
Thank you, John. Yes, Stephen?
It was just to build on John's comments about certainly our looking at, Councillor Vick highlighted this issue about open space standards and so forth. I mean, one of the four main threads of the local plan was about well-being. And we heard loud and clear the voices of people during the pandemic about the significance and importance of open space. But in some respects, we also have to analyse the effectiveness of that policy in achieving well-being outcomes and note the kind of conclusions from the health community about things like childhood activity and obesity and so forth. And so we do want to take a very careful and considered view because about how we can promote activity, how we can reduce loneliness, how we can improve community and sense of belonging through open spaces, because it's rather than a particular number, it's those outcomes and our experience of new settlements where we, in many cases, exceed substantially those open space requirements, but still end up with those challenges not necessarily being fully resolved early on. And it's that wider on conversation that we want as part of the wellbeing thread in the local plan with yourselves, but also with the health community and with our wider communities about how we can achieve more from the spaces that we have, because there's a very strong commitment to try and reverse some of those mental and physical health outcomes that even in a place like Cambridge, we're witnessing through the local plan process, through the development process.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And then Jenny, online, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I wanted to ask if you had any comments to make at all. No, thank you. Yes, Councillor Beck.
Yeah, if I could just follow up, what Stephen was just saying about the open space is exactly my concern. But follow-up question that I just wanted to have, it was about the student accommodation question, because the question was actually not predicated on the private rented sector, but was predicated on colleges buying properties and converting them to use as as student accommodation of sufficient small size not to require any regulatory approval. Now, that I think is the absence of being able to see what's going on there has the potential to really weaken the policy that we do have, which we try to apply in relation to maybe the larger new build purpose-built student accommodation, because the question we're asking the colleges and universities there is about their need for that accommodation. But it's really difficult to assess their answers if there's a whole part of their accommodation which they may be growing or shrinking, and I suggest growing, that is completely off our screen. And it's really important. I say specifically in the city centre, where colleges can buy up domestic buildings right next to them. It makes so much sense from their point of view, but it makes such an important difference to the character of the area, and the fact that at the moment history has been somewhat diverse, and that is being lost, and that's something that we may, many of us may welcome, or many of us may have a problem with, but it's something that does determine the quality of the environment, the quality of life for people, and really something that we ought to have our hook into, to, in the public interest, decide what we think is okay and what we think is maybe less okay.
Thank you very much, Councillor Beck.
Two responses there. I think there is a really important conversation with the colleges and the universities. On the one hand, through the schemes that we are involved with, the colleges and the university are talking around their increasing sense of responsibility towards managing and consolidating students into onto particular sites, or in terms of into a more controlled space. Clearly, the colleges and Cambridge University have more land in order to be able to pursue that approach. ARU has obviously a whole suite of other challenges. But John can maybe comment, because we are seeking to understand from the colleges and universities both their need, but also the strategy for addressing that need. John, I don't know if you can comment on that.
Thank you, Councillor Bickford. I get your question slightly more clearly now. Yes, so we're undertaking, as part of the last local plan, the 2018 Cambridge plan, there was a piece of evidence done to understand the student accommodation needs, and that involved surveying colleges and education providers to understand their needs, but also what they were doing in terms of provision. So we are currently undertaking a survey, and the officer that's dealing directly with it isn't here to answer, but I understand we've got quite a good response and we're collating that, so I can take that away and look at what sort of issues have been coming up through that in relation to that particular point. So it's an interesting question, but we are looking at it.
Thank you very much, John. Yes, Councillor Porrer.
Thank you. I should declare or remind people that I do work for ARU, so I'm students, that's sort of something I deal with every day. I do think it's really important, because, when we're looking at large planning applications for student bed space, I'm not sure we do ask how many actual students are you housing in the city, probably more for Cambridge University. But equally for ARU, they've got a lot of mature students, they may be living at home or in their own family home. So I think that kind of data could be asked for from the universities, partly because we're seeing a lot of HMO and houses of multiple occupation, whether they're licensed larger ones or smaller ones. And certainly my experience with students is some of the quality is quite poor. If you go into the private market, you know, you're seeing these kind of HMOs, we see them come into planning where there's lots and lots of bedrooms, not enough living space, arguably. So again, I think that is another piece we're missing. And I suppose I would add to that the kind of Airbnb and equivalent, because obviously students stay for a year, which is fantastic or more, but it's certainly, again, within the city centre, and I'm pretty sure across Cambridge, there's quite a lot of concern that these smaller sort of Airbnb and equivalents, where they don't need to get planning permission to change, are sort of fundamentally changing some of our neighbourhoods. And we're not, I know on planning terms it's quite difficult to control, but I don't think we've got a handle on the numbers. So again, I'd urge officers to maybe think about how we might be able to do that, even if it is literally doing a search on these kind of websites and seeing what comes up, because that is certainly a concern for residents, and it does change the way the neighbourhood is used, change the way local shops are used, potentially threaten some of the local centres if people aren't out there shopping every day. So again, I would just add that in, but I do understand the planning difficulties because there isn't a permission required in most of these cases. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Yes, Councillor Thumb.
I think the range of questions is really good because there's so much data here that, but it's been put together in a way to address the requirement under the local plan. And I know Councillor Sam Davies last year, she was asking for additional information that she gets asked by residents and that could be drawn out of this process and annual reporting, and has been. So I think that particularly your comments about the Class E and these changes to HMOs is really interesting. And I think if there are more questions that residents ask councillors, don't hesitate to come back, not just at this meeting, because it may be that it's easier to pull out information as they go along. So because there's so much data here, it's really valuable, and we could use it for more reasons than just the local plan monitoring. But I just want to say that the we recently had a planning application for student accommodation, and the college was going to made a commitment to give back student housing as for family dwellings, and that was a commitment that would be for several decades, I think. So I think that is we know that this is an issue and that we want more family homes, but the point you raised about the small homes is a really important one. And it may not just be the planning team, but the housing team, and all of us need to help to resolve that a bit more. But they're really good points raised. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments by all means? No? All right. Well, we will now go to vote then, and the recommendation is on page 42 of the agenda pack. So all those in favour, please raise your hands. Thank you very much. And does the Executive Councillor agree with the recommendation?
Yes, I do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark, John, and of course, Jenny. Thank you very much. And we will now move to item number 8, which is just a record of decision. And this is a response to the Uttlesford Draft Local Plan 2021 to 2041, Regulation 18, consultation at page 359. Now, as the decision has been made, I will ask that members note the report before. And before I do, are there any comments? And please keep this concise as decision has already been made. So are there any comments? No? So does the committee note this item? Yes? Noted. Excellent. Well, that actually concludes our Planning and Transport Scrutiny Committee. Thank you very much, everybody who took part. And the next one will be the 19th of March, 2024, of course. And can the producer now end the live stream? Thank you very much.